Thankfully, the Modern Warfare beta is right around the corner here for PlayStation 4 users, shortly to follow for Xbox One and PC with a crossplay weekend, but it's something that the Modern Warfare beta is coming up very fast. So today I wanted to talk to you guys about the 25 changes you can expect that we've seen publicly acknowledged. That is, I'm sure there's probably going to be plenty more, optimizing a lot of what we saw from the 2v2 alpha, but then also the changes that we can take from that and expect to see applied within the beta. Combing through a bunch of different Reddit threads talking about feedback, combing through a bunch of dev responses, and so on and so forth, we found these 20 things here that I want to share with you guys today. So let's jump into it because there is a lot to talk about. Firstly, let's just mention how this is going to be structured. I figured it's probably easiest to break it down into sort of 4 categories that are easier to digest. 1 being gameplay mechanics, 2 being weapons, which there's not as many as you'd think, and we'll get to why in a second, 3 being technical changes, and then 4 being detail-oriented ones that are just some sort of afterthoughts depending on how you look at it, but also are changes that will be coming no less. So let's start with the bigger ones, the gameplay mechanics. The first one that is a big issue that went around the first day or so, but then also stuck around in other locations, was that of jump shotting and just jumping mechanics in general. Now, the jump shotting was something that was there the entire weekend of the alpha, but the jumping mechanics may not have been something you saw all that much outside of, say, a couple of viral Twitter clips or something like that. But there was no specifics given as to what this change will do, but it's probably going to be pertaining to the bunny hop mechanics. Again, what that viral clip that went around was, where it showcased just how there was no cooldown on the jumps, and then the mobility ended up chaining together with each jump to the point where you'd end up traversing the map at 200% speed or something like that. So while there's no specific given for the change and adjustment that will be made, I would imagine they add a jumping cooldown instead of being able to chain together things like that to increase not only your mobility, but also to take away from any unfair advantage in gunfight to gunfight. The second thing that will be changed is that of the black and white shell shock damage screen. The next thing we'll talk about ties into this as well, but the black and white shell shock screen, you can't hear, and visually it's really mushy. It's not anything too pretty, and it messes with your view quite a bit. And this was something that was complained about a lot within the alpha, but thankfully isn't going to be something that really is too much of an issue in the beta, it seems like, because turns out this was actually just the result of the game trying to regenerate your health, but naturally in 2v2 you don't do that unless you have stim shots, so it would naturally be fixed in the game's beta with health regeneration, so it's not entirely black and white. You don't have that grunting or anything like that, but come for launch game modes like hardcore, that would get rid of that effect instead of the prolonged period that it had in the alpha. And that leads us into the third thing, that grunting that came along with it. Even after your color came back, you ended up still having that annoying grunting, which could take away from what you hear on the battlefield. That's said to be adjusted as well. Another big one that's going to be a huge key gameplay change is that of the head glitching. This was a huge issue in the alpha and was definitely a big thing that players were hoping to see fixed. I know that Stack was probably the worst of the bunch that I'd seen, at least, where literally only just the tip of the helmet would show over a surface, but they'd end up having a perfect viewpoint here of you. Meanwhile, you didn't have much to shoot back at, so it was a very unfair advantage, and I'm assuming this is going to adjust the camera angles here and what is available to shoot and what is to be seen, but your guess is as good as mine. That kind of stuff is super technical and well beyond my expertise in terms of what is needed to fix that kind of stuff. I know that if you adjust it too much, you end up running the risk of shooting well lower than you're used to. I mean, because your point of view in a first-person perspective originates from your model's eyes, but that's not necessarily where the weapon is located, so it's kind of got that compensation, which creates that discrepancy. But hopefully this ends up adjusting it to the point where it's no longer a real issue, but of course, it was well below expectations in terms of where it was at. Additionally, it was mentioned a couple of times that we'd have a few audio adjustments, actually. The biggest one out of this being that of actual footstep audio. It was very common that you'd end up hearing your teammates or your own footsteps tremendously loud, but you'd either sometimes hear the enemy or not at all, and more often than not, that footstep audio of the enemy, which is the more important one, was lower than that of your own footsteps. So that's going to be something that is adjusted. The first-person footstep audio will have a reduction, and the enemy footstep audio will be boosted. That's already been confirmed, and it's going to be something coming to the beta. Now, moving along to the weaponry category, again, there's not as many here in terms of changes already coming because it was the alpha, and every weapon was entry-level or had the same attachments and didn't account for any user-end items like the gunsmith attachments, which will either positively or negatively affect the weapons based on your choices for your loadout. down. So naturally, there's not as many weapon balancing things to happen because you didn't have that full customizable scope of what you do with the gunsmith. But we end up seeing the M19 will have a slight adjustment here, potentially in its damage rate. They didn't really specify what, but they also mentioned that there is the implementation of the hair trigger in the gunsmith, which is a selectable attachment, which will allow for a faster fire rate. Additionally, with no real specific details, they ended up mentioning they're going to be adjusting the kill trading in 2v2, and I think that actually stemmed out of my good friend Exclusive Ace's tweet to some of the developers, talking about how it seems almost random whenever there's a kill trade that will determine who wins or loses a round, rather than who has the first shot fired off. So we'll see if that ends up getting worked on as well, but that's been publicly acknowledged and is something that is mentioned to be coming in the beta. As for technical changes, this is where we start to get into some kind of cool stuff, but also some kind of boring stuff as well. But technical stuff, the first thing we'll see is some ADS sensitivity options on console. This was something introduced within Black Ops 4 within the Call of Duty franchise. It's not something that is tremendously all that new in the gaming scene overall, but was introduced for the first time in Black Ops 4, and it was something a lot of players loved. So that kind of stuff is going to be added in for the beta as well. They also ended up mentioning that aim assist is going to have more details for a coming adjustment here within the beta, meaning that the pros and cons of each aim assist option will be much better laid out, and it'll also be fixing all aim assist. Apparently, not all of the aim assists were working as intended in the alpha build, with some of them not really even working at all, but the placebo being in place that you thought you were getting a different effect because you had a different one selected. Additionally, there's also some FPS stutters on Pine that are going to be adjusted as well. They're going to be taken care of. I know that there were some FPS drops that I personally experienced. You may very well be in that same category. They also mentioned that the red enemy name tags will have adjustments as well. And this was something that had a couple of different things happen with it within the alpha. Firstly, it showcased through walls, which is naturally not something you want to see because that gives away player locations, whereas it should not. And it also is misaligned and off center. So sometimes you'd end up having a case where you could maybe wall somebody, but their name tag wouldn't be exactly right over them, so you wouldn't be getting the hit markers. You'd think you were, but you actually weren't. So those things will be adjusted and fixed out for the beta. Additionally, talking walling enemies and shooting through cover, bullet penetration issues on various amounts of cover are going to be fixed out for the beta as well. They didn't really offer too many specifics in terms of what all this entailed and what caliber of bullets were most affected, what surfaces were most affected, but they ended up saying that there was a varying level of locations on each map where some bullet penetration was almost non-existent, if not non-existent. Another technical change comes down to mouse and keyboard support on PlayStation 4. Granted, in the alpha, you could plug in your mouse and keyboard natively and have some selectable options there, but it really didn't give you anything to customize. You couldn't change your sensitivities, you couldn't change any keybinds, and so that kind of stuff was actually kind of big if you were playing on keyboard. And granted, yes, for the crossplay stuff, keyboard and mouse is going to put you in other keyboard and mouse lobbies. You won't have to worry about it too much, but if you want to end up simply plugging in your mouse and keyboard to your PlayStation 4, it didn't really give you anything to work with. So that'll be fixed out with some options there for anybody that chooses to do that one. Then one thing that just makes the game literally unplayable is they're going to fix out the rate in terms of the proper English welcome. Yes, that's sarcasm. It's not actually literally unplayable, but apparently the meme-worthy and favorite quote of the alpha, "Give them a proper English welcome," was actually a dialogue that played a little too frequently than intended at the beginning, so they're going to end up tuning that and it'll happen a little less often. So anyways though, talking Gunfight a little bit further, in particular, Gunfight OSP, the mode in which you have to pick up your items to end up getting anything at all, that's going to be something where they fix out some pickup bugs. Personally, I didn't play all that much of Gunfight OSP to experience this myself, but having seen gameplay of it, having heard feedback from many other people, there was a pickup bug where it wouldn't pick up weaponry sometime. It wouldn't really recognize that you were holding in the button to pick it up, so therefore, it left you in some high and dry situations where you could be standing still and just get totally taken out. Also, sometimes it would work, but it just wouldn't be smooth. So they're going to be working on that one for the beta and making it something a little more polished off. And they also ended up saying they'll have a tap to pick up option being added for the beta also. So instead of holding it, you can just run over and tap and hopefully it picks it up again as smooth as intended. The next two adjustments being made are going to deal with barriers and walls of some sort, with clipping and also damage reduction being the key topics of discussion. discussion. The first one being that wall and barriers ended up having a bug where some places didn't offer any explosive reduction whatsoever. So whether or not there was a wall between you and that explosive, it would have treated it the same exact way as if it was just right next to you. So naturally, that's a big thing that's an issue, and so that's going to be fixed out for the beta. That's a known issue that was already commented on being fixed out for the beta. And then the one to follow that ends up coming down to some clipping issues with player characters. This one was a hilarious clip that I saw over on Reddit in which somebody ended up proning behind a concrete barrier, and they wondered how they died through it whenever it was a shotgun versus a concrete wall. Normally, you wouldn't be able to wall that at all with the shotgun, but it ended up turning out that their face actually popped right through the concrete barrier, to which it clipped entirely through it, so it would act as if there was no barrier there for it. Again, this was commented on and said it would be fixed out for the beta, so shouldn't be anything we have to worry about too much, but still created a funny clip out of that one. Additionally, we'll end up seeing some fixes for smoke grenades. This was an issue in the alpha in which it showcased differently per player character screen. So one player could end up seeing an entire smoke screen, you couldn't see through it at all, and another player looking the exact same way would end up not seeing any smoke at all. That was an issue that ended up creating, of course, some imbalances within gunfights, especially if it cut off any vision, but that was something that was again confirmed to be fixed out for the beta. The final technical change we'll talk about before we round out the video with detail-oriented changes is that of control adjustments for the beta scope zoom. Now, this was something in the alpha. Some of the scopes ended up having some R3 versus triangle discrepancies where it would be something some players preferred others, but you couldn't change it. That's going to be something that adds a little bit more variability to it as well within the beta and then the full launch. So keep an eye out for that one. And finally, rounding out the video comes down to the last handful of changes, that being more so just detail-oriented stuff that isn't anything absolutely insanely game-breaking, but is stuff that you probably noticed. So the first one being that matchmaking and faction names in the matchmaking screens were incredibly hard to view. The visibility was almost non-existent, so that's going to be something that the opacity and the text is going to be a little bit more visible compared to where it was in the alpha. Additionally, scopes on shotguns are going to be something that it details a little further, that you'll have a longer range on the 7.25 with that compared to, say, the other pump shotguns in the game. So that'll just be something that, again, is detail-oriented and lets you know. It doesn't necessarily change the gameplay itself. Additionally, for the beta coming up, this was an adjustment made from the reveal build, actually. The tablets that you pull out for certain streaks, like the helicopter, it ends up showcasing the mini-map and some of the action going along with it. That's going to be either adjusted in terms of its sizing or have some of the stuff scaled down differently so it's not as cluttered. That was something that was, again, adjusted for this beta and commented on already. Another one is that the display of weaponry within each operator is going to have the trigger discipline. This is, again, confirmed to be a little smaller detail that people caught on to within the alpha, and of course, there's some of the reveal build mechanics that the operator was actually holding a trigger as if he was ready to shoot. Again, smaller detail that you'd have your trigger finger outside of that until you're ready to pull the trigger, but that'll be added in for the beta as well. And the final thing that will be adjusted is that of the reset bug, where a lot of player settings were getting changed every single time they went into a game and exited out, or when they booted up the game itself. A big one of this was the film grain. That was one that really adjusted the viewpoint of this, and some others I think were some of the sensitivities and also then the motion blur as well. But all in all, that's 25 changes here coming to the beta from what we saw from the reveal build and also the 2v2 alpha that we saw as of recently as well for PlayStation 4 users. So there's a lot up on deck that's going to change either drastically or not so drastically the beta, in which what we saw already is being adjusted and being something that plays a little bit better, hopefully, for the beta coming up very shortly. So that said, wanted to give you guys the heads up and let you know what all you could expect that would be different compared to what we saw already and what you may be jumping into play as early as of maybe this Thursday, maybe Wednesday if it goes live a day earlier like rumored. But all in all, I wanted to keep you guys in the loop. So let me know your thoughts down there in the comment section down below. Is there anything in particular that you're really looking forward to out of these changes? Anything that you were hoping would change and has not? Whatever it is, feel free to let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. But if you enjoyed the video, make sure you drop a like down below. And of course, if you are new to the channel, make sure you guys subscribe so you don't miss a single thing regarding all things Modern Warfare and anything relating to Call of Duty. If you guys want to stay up to date with all that, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss a single thing. And if you guys also want to follow me over on Twitter and Instagram, those are the best place to get connected outside of YouTube. Practically live on both those. If you guys want to strike up a conversation, ask me a question, wherever it may be, that link is down there in the description below. But let's send that out of the way. Thank you guys all so much for watching. Mine is Espresso. I'll see you guys later. Take care and peace.